I think the nice thing about writing in that way instead of following market trends is that at the end of the day, if the market changes, I still have this book that I've always wanted to write and always wanted to read as a kid. I still have it for me. And so like that's, what's that worth?
This is You May Contribute a Verse. I'm Brenna Jeanneret, author of newly released The Law of Birthdays, illustrated by Maria Condra from Cardinal Rule Press. I'm joined by my co-host, Josh Monken, dad, kidlit author, and science communicator, and podcast wizard Jon Seymour, author-illustrator of A Morning with Blueberry. And that was our guest, Melody Plan, author of Inside the Compost Bin, illustrated by Ron Pham and Vin Nigel. We talk about birds and animal care, how Melody got her agent, and saying no to an opportunity when it doesn't line up with your goals. Here's Melody's verse. Melody, I love the feathers on the board behind you. Did you guys already talk about that, or
no, not yet.
No?
We just talking about the sounds,
Okay.
not the sights.
We were talking about birds.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can hear birds. Actually, is that on your end? Yeah.
It's not on my end.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't. I couldn't tell.
Now I hope that it comes through in the recording.
Yeah. Right.
Just open your window real quick.
So what?
They are both of them.
So what are the feathers in the background? Do you just collect them, or are they for? Because they look like they're labeled also.
Yeah. Reminds me to fix those too. They're like all kind of hanging because I have a fan that goes too, and the labels fall off. But
yeah.
In a former life, I was an aviculturist, which, if people don't know, that's a specialist for birds. I used to help breed and raise exotic birds, and those are just some of the birds that I worked with. And
Wow.
I can't get birds out of my life. I have chickens, and I volunteer for a Hawaii nonprofit here that helps rehabilitate bats and birds statewide, and just some of the birds that I volunteer with too. So
Where you just rudely remove their
Wow.
feathers. I need to take a memento
just
before I
like a
release you.
trophy each one. If they're
Yeah,
not
right?
flapping around too much, I could just.
They're like, ow, rude.
But they molt just like us with our fingers. They grow, we clip them off, and they just grow in feathers. And so those are my mementos. I
Gotta
collect them
say.
off the ground. If they give it to me.
Way
Also
more
just pluck 'em, too.
collectible.
Just
Yeah,
kidding.
exactly. Yeah, way more collectible than fingernail clippings, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. So you said that's in a former life. So is that right before you started writing picture books, or what does that timeline look like for you?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was right before. I don't know how to. So it was after college. I always wanted to be some kind of work with animals in some capacity, and did that for 3 years, and then or so. And then became a technical writer. And please delete all this. I just confess.
No, we're going to delete the part where you say delete this. No, it's all good. No. And I don't know the extent to which you've listened to the podcast before, but Brenna and I are always in the battle for places where we connect or don't with whoever we're talking to. Technical writing is something that I did for the better part of a decade. And it is not that creative or exciting, but it is it's a great opportunity to think in terms of like audience receptivity of the message that you're trying to send, and how to use language really, really precisely. So
And
gives you good
concisely,
chops.
I think.
Yeah.
I couldn't really respond to that because I was like, my brain was going like in different areas. To answer your question too about how often I've listened to the podcast, I've listened to a couple episodes because I wanted to see what I was getting into. You guys talked
That's
about Magic
fair.
the Gathering at one point. I got really excited because I
That's a
used to
Josh
play
thing.
Magic
That
the
would have been a
Gathering.
Josh connection.
But before I go too far on like a ramble and a tangent in that direction, it was because I've always been into writing and I've always been into animals, and I knew that I wanted to, if I could do both, it would be great. And I was like, while I was talking about animals, I was thinking about writing, and so my brain was just kind of ping-ponging in different directions. But so writing was always in my life. I became an aviculturist, didn't really have a lot of time to write, which was very saddening for me. I had to have both in some capacity. I was like, I'll be a science writer, but really like that's a different industry altogether. So I was an aviculturist for a bit, looked at all my colleagues who were in this industry for a while, and they all had injuries. I'm like, I can't keep doing this forever. I love it, but it's so hard on the body. So hats off to people who work with any kind of animals in any form on a full-time or more basis. And then I became a technical writer, which Josh was talking about before, that it definitely hones your skill in a certain way that I think gives an advantage for picture book writing, because it's so brief, because it's so concise. You have to really limit your words, and that's what I do all the time with technical writing. So I think it was interesting because originally I thought I would be like writing novels first, but then as time went by, like I really started gravitating toward picture books, and it just kind of clicked in there. I'm still a technical writer too, so there's that.
You gotta bring.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I was gonna ask then as sort of a follow up, because so your debut book, which is, I mean, we will talk about that at length. But Inside the Compost Bin, it looks amazing. But that sort of falls in line with, what you're saying, like working with animals and, being outside and all of that, like it's sort of one and the same. But based on what you have just told us, I am surprised that your debut is not about birds. Have you written picture books about birds? Like I would imagine, but I mean, maybe not.
Yeah. One's, I can't really talk about because it's in discussion with some people.
Amazing.
Yeah. Hopefully that goes there. But, or is picked up, I should say. But yeah, I've written certainly about my birds in general, but I think the part about that is I feel like there's so many good books in that realm already. So at least that I've picked up with Inside the Compost Bin, there's a lot of books about composting, but usually marketed toward adults. Or if they are marketed to our kids, it's like, it's a good thing, but doesn't really talk about, what happens, which was really important to me as a curious kid growing up. I just always wanted to know what happens, what's going on. Just really wanted to get into like just watching it go. So that's why I guess that's my first debut book, or why I didn't choose something as complex and vast as birds, I guess. Not to say that composting isn't complex, but if I had to choose, I mean, this is what ended up happening. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes you don't get to pick, I was just curious, if you had thought about writing about birds or not. Because I've been writing picture books for a bit, but I've been a climber for most of my life. And I have not until like this past week tried to write a picture book about rock climbing, and I don't know why it never sort of like dovetailed, but it just didn't. So I thought I would ask. Sometimes I feel like maybe you're too close to things in your life and you're just like, I don't know, like it's too hard to write about, or I can't get it out, or so
that's so
why
true. That's so true. I feel that deeply. There's things that I really, really care about, and there's just too much, or I just don't know what it looks like yet. So I'm like, eventually it'll happen. But not right now. It's not like...
Well, just keep your mind open. There's a vast untapped market for the youngest generation for Magic the Gathering picture books.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like there's some licensing tie-ins that are possible there.
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah, right.
Are you? I did not discern this, and I'm sorry if it's boldly stated elsewhere, and it just flew past my brain. Do you have an agent?
I do.
Yeah.
Dan Kramer is my agent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm reminded of... Yes, okay. All right. Hi, Dan.
Yeah.
I knew that, and then it flew out of my brain. Yeah, so...
Dan is amazing.
Yeah, Dan is amazing. Fan and frequent guest of the podcast as well. But, so how did you get hooked up with him? And also, was this what hooked him into the compost bin?
Yeah. Ooh, good question. I haven't thought about this in a while. It was the Atlanta Writing Conference on a virtual level. I remember because it was like, I don't know, 2020. So everything was virtual, which was great in terms of this because I would never have signed up for it or even seen it. I mean, it's Atlanta and I was living in California at the time. And so it just wouldn't have pinged on my radar. And I'm not particularly active on social media either. So I think I just happened to find it, and then I was looking for specifically picture book manuscript like agents or people looking for those. And so Dan came up as one of the people who was looking for PB manuscripts, and I went and booked a session with him because he had like pitch sessions. I don't know if that's like the official terminology, but like appointments you can make, 15-minute appointments to pitch. And for Dan, I pitched like 3 different manuscripts, and he wanted all 3. So that was amazing. He thought that all 3 were great, and it was including Inside the Compost Bin. So
awesome. Yeah,
it's like
awesome.
the real Dan sweet spot too, because I know, I mean, his journey has been really evolving and in a really quick way over the past several years. So that was his. You got in on the Dan Kramer ground level.
I was going to say on the ground floor. Yeah.
I just feel so lucky. I really do think there's so many people who are talented and much more experienced than I am, and so I really had no idea what I was doing. I just like looked up stuff and like hoped, and I think I was just in the right time and place. And thank you, Dan. Shout out, Dan. Someone else could have replaced me if he kept looking. I don't know. I really don't know, but I just appreciate that. He thought my work was something to believe in and that people needed to see and read beyond his email, I guess, or the pitch.
Yeah, right. Outside of your Google Docs.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I don't recommend listening to this podcast while you're drinking necessarily, but if you happen to be drinking, I feel like if you rewind about 5 minutes and then drink every time we say the name Dan, then you would probably have a really fun Friday.
Just a blackout.
You have to pick back up and listen to the rest of the episode in the morning.
Magic the Gathering and a drinking game like combined. It'd be a whole night. It's a whole night, guys. Well, let's talk about Inside the Compost Bin. So what was it like from Google Docs to publication? Like, how was that an easy journey, or did you guys sub wide, or was it hard? Did you get an R&R along the way? Like, what was that like for you?
I'm trying to think now because it feels so long ago. These questions I just never thought about in such a long time. So it was. I'm trying to remember whether or not we pitched it because it was supposed to be a series. So Inside the Compost Bin is really interesting because it was supposed to be a middle book to a series, and I'm pretty sure we pitched them all together, but I think later, at first, I think we pitched them all together and. Take a shot for Dan, but I think Dan later pitched them separately later because I think since I never had a published book yet, it's kind of hard to say like, hey, this is really gonna make it, like any proof that it'll make it in the market. So maybe it was easier to pitch individually, but this is just me all assuming. I don't know if this is actually the case there, but I think it was 3 first and then 1 by 1. But I know that one of the editor that we ended up speaking with, who is now retired, and that's how long this process was. He ended up retiring, and then the book ended up going
There was
somewhere else.
not causation there. It wasn't because of that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He's like, oh, this is too rough.
Yeah.
Pass it on to
Right.
someone.
But
Throw me in
on
the
for
compost
this.
bin.
Yeah, throw me in the compost.
Right.
But he saw, the editor had seen all 3 and ended up going with the middle book. He thought Inside the Compost Bin would be better appeal because more people knew of what compost was, as opposed to the other 2 methods that I was pushing at the time with it, I should say. So we went with Inside the Compost Bin. I remember he said that he would take it to. Did we edit it? I think we edited it a little bit, so there was more of a story because it was more of like process based instead of a call to action, which I think they were looking for. Which after tweaking a little bit with Dan, it helped a lot make it what it is today, what everyone would be reading today. I'm very thankful.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you pitched it originally or subbed it or whatever as a 3-book. So if I'm understanding it right, a 3-book series.
Right.
And
yes.
so whatever came before and after, was it part of the a bigger compost bin idea, or were they separate books? Like, could you now, or maybe you are now, subbing those 2 other books separately as like one-off books?
Yeah, they're more of like they're definitely all standalone, but I think in the same way that it's just a similar I don't want to say universe, but like the subject matter is different, but the vibes are the same. I don't know. It's not
Okay.
it's not like you have to read one to read the next. You could read them out of order. They're definitely standalone. But
Sure.
yeah, it was just that there are 3 different kinds of composting methods. So yeah.
Okay.
What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry. I think you asked a second.
Oh, just wondering, yeah, if you were subbing them, on their own as standalone books now, like, are you going forward? Like, could they, like, does it make sense to continue on, to sub them, or would you wait and see how Compost Bin does, and then maybe they get picked up as like part of a series, or?
Yeah, that's kind of in the talks right now. It's mostly the latter, what you said, but
Okay.
I believe only one of them is would probably do as well as compost bin because it's more known as a type of composting method as opposed to the other one, which is like it probably needs the other 2 for it to have legs, I guess. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry for
Okay,
being
yeah.
so vague. It's like when things are in talks, like I don't want to like assume or say
Yeah.
or promise.
No, that's fine. I was gonna say, like, I'm being intentionally vague because I don't
Okay.
know how much you can actually
Yeah,
say,
that's
but
same here. Thank
I
you.
appreciate you giving us like the overview, because I'm very interested, because I've never heard of a book being subbed that way before, and then like, one being pulled and being like, oh yeah, this is great, but then like maybe there's possibility for more. It's a really unique situation. So
Yeah, but again, this is, I think, really, I think it's helpful to pull out in the sense that, whatever the best intentions or whatever the visions that we have for the work that we are producing and writing, who knows how it's going to evolve once it hits the sort of brain and like sales receptive mindsets of editors and art directors and all that. I mean, best we could do is sort of take what we've done and adapt it and just stay open to the people who know what's going to resonate with the market, I suppose.
Yeah, right. And because it's such a unique situation too, I mean, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, right? Like, you have to, and this is really hard for me because, I feel like any writer can relate to this. Like, you try so hard to get an agent, you try so hard to get stuff published, and you sort of become your own agent for a little while because, you have to advocate for your work so hard and do all this research that once you get representation, letting go of some of that is really hard, and sort of trusting in that relationship and like another person to know what to do with your book. I still struggle with that because I'm like, oh God, like I feel like we should really put it here, and I wish that my agent was doing that, but they're not, and there's probably a reason, but I don't know what it is. And like, like you just, that's something that I still am sort of like, okay, I need to just like write what I'm writing, give it to my agent, and like let go of it, right? So it says a lot about, your process and sort of how you guys went through that. And you're like, yeah, okay, this is great. Like, let's do the standalone one. We'll see what happens. Like, maybe, it will evolve from there. I just think that speaks a lot to your relationship.
Yeah, and I think also when we were pitching inside the compost bin, like individually and stuff, we got a lot of interest for it, but there was questions about like, oh, we want like a certain change to happen, or can you make it more towards social emotional learning? Like we got like a ask for that, and there's I don't know. I think at least for writing, I have I like to think that I have a pretty good intuition. Like that's not for this book. For other books maybe, but this manuscript in particular, like it's not quite what I was trying to go for. I think the message will be lost. One of the messages I'm trying to say is lost, which is basically like, oh, you should compost, as opposed to you should care about something other. And not to say that isn't important, it's just not what I was trying to make it do. So being able to, or choosing to say no to opportunities when you haven't gotten a yes yet is like really scary. And
Totally.
what was really nice is that I had Dan's support. Like, he really trusted not just the work, but me, and respected my input in that. And I don't know how it is with other agents. Like, I only have the one experience, but I just felt very taken care of and safe in that space. So just, that was really cool too. Sorry, Josh, I think you were going to say something and then I cut right in before you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. You're...
I have no idea what I was going to say. It might have been some
Sorry.
version. Well, one thing that I was going to ask about, and I'm interested in exploring now that we know that the sort of story aspect was something that was suggested or that you had worked on with your editor. This being what is essentially a nonfiction book, not essentially, it is nonfiction about the process of composting. How written was it when you sent it? You didn't sub it on proposal because we understand that that's not generally done, especially for a debut picture book. But was it all all the way there? You'd done all the research and all that beforehand.
Yes,
yeah.
It was all done. The back matter was all done. We actually had to cut down some of the back matter because I think it was originally like 4 spreads, and then they said you only have 2, and that freaked me out a bit. And then when I saw the draft, it ended up being 3, and I'm like, that was a nice compromise.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like all of it was done, completely. So I think that maybe that helped with your decision too.
Yeah.
So I have a question based on that. So nonfiction books I've heard also are for picture books. Yeah, you like most of the time you have it all done. But I have heard some editors say like I know at source books specifically, like they won't necessarily look at one or take one on unless you have sort of this like known platform or you're like an expert, quote unquote expert in the field. Mm-hmm. Did that come up at all, or was it based on just the research you presented and like here's what I did and like this is all factual, or were there any fact checkers on the other end? I mean, I would imagine so, but I'm just curious
I'm so
for all
glad
of that.
you asked this. Yeah. So I am the subject matter expert. I'm a master composter, so that really helped for them for them. Like any questions they had, they went and asked me, and I think also like the amount of detail. I'm so sorry to my editors and the illustrators. They're amazing. The illustrators are so amazing, by the way. But like,
I have questions about that too. But so we'll put a pin in that. But okay. Yeah, so continue.
They were just so. I just felt like they were so accommodating and kind, because I feel like when like things that I thought were important might have like seemed like little like so. Oh, there was like one point even when working with the illustrators, I'm like, hey, I noticed that the pot is really close to the composting bin, and it's not. Can we move it back? Like it was just like I was like, not to be like that person, but like to make it as accurate as possible. We wouldn't put like this curing compost so close to these plants because the critters will move and go to these plants and start eating the new roots there. And it's just like a small thing that we never bring up like in the text at all, but it's like it's shown in the illustration that it's not near any plants, or the plants are just not in the picture because the curing compost is somewhere else. And it was just so important for me to mention that, like just little granular stuff. And I think by mentioning things like that, it's like they felt like they didn't have to really check with anyone else, because like clearly this author is being annoying. It's so annoying about this. But also just for me.
So level of annoyance. I'm gonna put this down on my
the more
my nonfiction. Yes. Okay.
It's definitely correlated. But I also checked with Solana Center for Environmental Innovation, which is the people who I learned how to compost with. I'm an eco docent with them, which is really just a glorified volunteer, and I talked to quite a few of them about these books, and I wanted them to be as accurate as possible. I still had a lot of their resources that they had given me when I was taking the master composting course. And so I referenced those a lot because I definitely didn't want to be giving information that was incorrect, because, that's not helping anyone, certainly not helping me or the publisher's reputation. So it was just so important for me to get that right and make it pass through checks. And I'm excited to say that they believed it enough, they being Solana Center, believed it enough that I had my book launch with them at their venue. So
awesome.
That was the validation I needed, really.
That's super incredible.
Yeah. It's time for this week's book reviews. We'll be doing something a little different from now until the election. In coordination with the hashtag Kidlit for Kamala movement, started by Martha Brackenbrough and others, we will be reviewing books that support the ideals of the Harris-Walz campaign, such as inclusivity, LGBTQIA+ rights, anti-bullying, choice, and emotional evolution. We're hoping these titles will help to expand your library and serve as an entryway to bigger conversations with the kids and the adults in your life, all about the important topics in our society. If you have a book you think might be a good fit, or you want to be a part of the movement, please email us at versshowpod@gmail.com. From John, I Voted, Making a Choice Makes a Difference, by Mark Shulman and Serge Bloch, is an easy-to-digest introduction to voting for young readers. By using simple words and quirky illustrations, the book explains how opinions shape decisions, starting with fun but relatable examples, like choosing a class pet. As it progresses, the story connects these everyday choices to the bigger picture of government elections and how adults experience voting and why they do it. A great read to educate and inspire. John gives this book 5 onions out of 5. From Josh, Lucky Every Day is Josh's initial foray into our Kidlit for Kamala movement from now until the election. This book, by Kathryn Otoshi, is a surprisingly touching story about bullying and empathy that you hope kids don't have to endure in their real lives, especially in election season. Words hurt, but more importantly, empathy heals. The lesson this book so deftly teaches us is that we don't have to just put up with injustice, nor do we have to settle for punitive punishment. When we create an environment where everyone can get what they need, we're all happier for it. And my review this week is for Bitsy Bat, School Star, by podcast friend Kaz Windness. This book highlights the lovable Bitsy Bat as a neurodiverse kid with some anxiety about school. Not only is this a sweet ode to back to school, but this book is a great choice in opening the conversation about embracing our differences and holds true to the adage that diversity only makes us stronger. Don't forget to get your own library reviews and requests in. It's the #1 way to help an author's sales. Love the podcast and want to help support more great episodes like this one? Check out our Patreon, grab some cool podcast swag, give a shout out to someone amazing in the Kidlit world, or review and share an episode with friends. And now, back to our show.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so before we go into the illustration thing, which it feels like based on vibes, this is the territory that we're going to go into, because if you have not seen this book, you being people who are potentially listening to this episode, there is so much minute detail, and it is vivid and glorious. But before I get to that, I do want to ask about the story nature of this, because this is something that's interesting and cross-category to explore with this book. And I'm thinking of other, folks who do nonfiction really well, like Jess Stremmer, who's been on the podcast before. There will be a thing that you are describing and talking about, but it is framed around some light story. But it's not like somebody's emotional journey. It is just framed around, this is what is happening. Let me use this story experience to walk you through how that works. And so, I know that this came from the editor, but how did you think about framing this up, and how do you think about this in terms of like there being that like slightly nonfiction, or reverse that, slightly fictional element to it?
It's so interesting because when we were sending this out, I honestly didn't even know what genres or categories it was in. In my head, it was fictional because, like, I'm making up this character. Yeah, exactly. I was making up this character, and, these people don't really exist. You can assume that it's me, the author. I even made like the composter originally be genderless. I refer to them as they, and ended up changing to she later. I think it would just be easier. I'm not sure, but really, but it ended up changing to she later. But yeah, I was like thinking it was fiction in my head, and then it got categorized as nonfiction, and I'm like, that's fine. Whatever's
gonna sell books. Yeah,
right. Wherever you want to put it on the shelf.
So yeah, in terms of framing, so the manuscript, the first manuscript that I wrote in the series, had this kind of outline that I had that was very process oriented, similar to this book, Inside the Compost Bin. And so I kind of already knew what Inside the Compost Bin would look like based on that template, which is process, like beginning to end. I feel like it already had a story because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, I don't know. Right. I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering the question the way that you would like.
I don't have a way that I want you to answer the question. No. You absolutely did, which was, how do you think about this? You didn't, I think, is the answer. You thought about the story as it formed itself up in your mind, and I think that the advantage that composting especially has when you're writing a story about it is that it's not just components of a thing that you want to know more about. It is a biological process that occurs over time with specific steps and specific components that contribute to the success. So it really does lend itself to a chronological story in that way.
Yeah, right. So I'm wondering then, because we've talked about Compost Bin and then possible bird stories, and I'm assuming that one is probably also nonfiction. Do you write a lot of fiction, or are you mostly a nonfiction writer, or maybe you do both?
So much fiction. I write so much fiction. It's actually a shock that it would be nonfiction first, like we talked about before.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like we talked about before, I had no idea that this would be even categorized as nonfiction. It makes sense that it is, but yeah, I thought honestly that it would be some kind of fiction because there's fictional. This is happening in a fictional kind of setting. People are doing this, but like there's a person in this place that doesn't exist and stuff like that. So, I definitely write way more fiction than I do nonfiction.
Okay, yeah. I'm always curious because you never know, and it's sort of interesting too. I guess it's a just something I want to highlight that, like, it's fun to write in different genres and sort of challenge yourself because you never really know what will come of it, because you're saying like, I thought fiction, was the thing that I was going to get published with. And then, here you are debuting with nonfiction. And sometimes I feel like your strengths are sort of highlighted in a way that you're like, oh, right. Okay. This is like, the market is there for it. Like it's saleable, like, all this stuff. So so it just makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So let's talk about illustrators.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's.
I mean, there's so much here to explore. Again, because it's so rich. But the first question, I guess, is a process question before we get into sort of the scientific accuracy and everything else that I'm looking at in the pages that are in front of me. But what was your involvement in, or what do you know of, or how did this work? I guess 3 questions in one. You have two illustrators on your picture book, which is different. Yes. Do they know each other?
I've never
Do you know
seen
them?
that before.
It's the first that we've seen of that.
Right? Are they a team that
they're
were?
A team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So technically, I guess it's just one illustrator in that they are together. They come
it's
as
one
a
check
package.
to write, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about how they work together? Because I'm so curious. Like being, even trying to co-author something is like, oh, how do you do that? Like, how do you put your spin on somebody else's stuff and like, work together? So with illustrations that I know nothing about being an illustrator, and then trying to collaborate with somebody, like, do you know anything about how they work together? Like maybe one does the color and somebody else does like the whatever. I don't know.
I wish I could tell you. I really do. I'm pretty sure they live together, that they're partners in some capacity, and I'm sure that helps. But
yeah.
but yeah, like unfortunately I don't have insight on like who does the coloring or who does the outlining or anything like that.
Yeah,
Just
sure.
that they're so patient with me. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to have them on the show
to
answer all of our questions.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Did you correspond with them directly, or
No.
through Tilbury House?
Yeah, it was through Tilbury House the entire time. But what's fantastic is that, so I got drafts of things. And so based on the drafts, I don't like to waste people's times or be perceived as someone who is wasting somebody's time. So I try to give as much detail as possible, and they take what serves them and they can leave whatever doesn't. So when I saw these drafts, and then whenever they had questions, I would add, and based off the question, I would branch off to certain things that I think might help. And it was nice because I would get outlines, and then I got the non-colored version, and I was like, fantastic! It could look like, ship it like this. And then when the color was added, I'm like, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It was way more than I could have ever expected. But it was actually pretty painless, I think, considering how wrong it could have gone, I think, because there's just so many nuances. But it helps that they're both gardeners. Like, they both really care about nature. And I saw that too when we were choosing artists and they sent me their portfolio. I was looking at the portfolio, and there's so much green and nature. You could tell that they cared about this specifically because their portfolio was full of this stuff. So I didn't want to look at anyone else. I wanted them specifically. Yeah.
So did Tilbury give you like some options then? They were like, hey, this is, a few illustrators that we're considering, and then they let you weigh in?
So it was interesting because I had an idea and a feeling of what this book was. Like, I had an idea of what it would look like, but in terms of the feeling, I should say, I didn't know exactly what that would look like. I figured, like how casting directors describe it, when it's in front of them or the actor's in front of them, they know that they're the one, and then they want to hire them. Mm-hmm. I figured that's what would happen. Like, I would see the art and I would know. And they only sent me one for the first, like, they're like, we're thinking about going with this artist. Like, and I'm sure if I said no, they would send me several other artists. But I looked at them and I'm like, okay, we're aligned. We're 100% aligned because I don't want to see anyone else. This is the first choice that Tilbury House had was my choice. So it's pretty amazing.
It's more confirmatory.
I mean, that,
yeah.
And it's pretty interesting too. And I think this is more so true with smaller presses, that they will have the author weigh in, or they will ask, for, your thoughts on like character design or color palette or whatever. Because you don't usually hear about that, like, in the bigger houses, like maybe, throw us some names, we'll see what we can do, like that kind of thing. But I feel like the author is not always that involved. So that was probably really nice to have you, like, to give you options and to just let you know, like, if this one isn't quite a fit, like we could, tweak it.
Yeah, I had no idea. This is my first ever experience, and it's really setting the bar for me. But if I ever get with a larger house, I might, have a bucket of ice cold water being poured on me.
I mean, not to say they don't take in, your thoughts at all, but it does feel like it's more of a smaller house thing to ask for the author's input. Which is, really nice. Also, just before we get too far away from the illustrators, can you shout them out? Can you shout out their names so we can give them their...
I'm scared about saying it incorrectly, and I'm so sorry if I am going to say their names incorrectly. But Rong Pham and Vin Nguyen. So
that seems right. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to put them out there. Yeah. Amazing.
How do you? Okay, so this is more illustration stuff. How do you get to the level of scientific accuracy and robustness that you have? Does that come from their background in gardening?
I do.
And sorry, just there's a version of this in my head as I was reading this book for the first time, where I thought, how do you regionalize this Or how do you make this global? Because biodiversity is different everywhere. And it doesn't require you to, label the millipedes and localize the fruits to, one specific place to orient the story in the right way. But there are clearly subconscious choices that are being made.
Yeah, such a good question. So for the compost bin itself, for example, because there's loads of different kinds of compost bins. They actually sent me like 9 to choose from, and I was like, you can go with they were sketches too, like which compost bin because there's like the main character,
Totally.
so
I was just thinking that like you're gonna see it on like every page, so make it good.
Exactly. And it was so. Again, I said these numbers, like I chose 3 of them, are really good. Like I don't care which of these 3 that you choose from, but as long as it's these 3, and these are why the other 6 don't work. And it goes back to the details, but I just wanted to explain, like, oh, this one's too small, so it won't get hot as fast, or it wouldn't work as well. This one doesn't touch the ground, so the critters won't ever actually go into the bin. Like stuff like that. Like I just kind of explained why we didn't choose it, and I think by adding those details, it helped inform the choices about why I chose this particular bin. Like, so they showed that it was touching the ground and things were going in it and out of it in this kind of fashion. And they ended up choosing this bin because it has like the mesh, so you can like you can see through it in a natural way instead of like pretending we're looking inside. Like it's literally you could see it inside from the outside. So that was really cool. But going into the bit you talked about, Josh, about how composting is different around the world, so like what bugs to choose and things like that. Like I think this is where it goes into that kind of fictional-ish aspect of this nonfiction book, because there's way more critters, than we can see, and that's illustrated, of course. And I think I'm not entirely sure if all of these critters exist at one point together. Like I can't confirm that, but they are definitely decomposers in some fashion. So like I think that's the important part, is that we showed that these are all decomposers. Instead of being too focused on where is this exactly taking place, because it's kind of vague there too, like the type of tree, what kind of tree is it, or you just know that it takes place in someone's backyard and there's a tree involved and then there's a lot of ground. But yeah, in terms of like choosing what decomposers to show, it was more important for me to say like let me back up. It was more important to say what decomposers to show rather than like the accuracy on if they would coexist together at this point in time in this location.
I see.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally. I used to be a small boy, and I'd read a lot of dinosaur picture books, and it was more important for me to see a lot of dinosaurs on the page than to understand that they existed at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
So on that note, what did your art notes look like for this book? Or were there any?
I think being a technical writer really helps here too, because I would specify like a thing like, on number 9, because they would number things too, like it would be on number 9, like it would be about 6 inches away from like the compost would be added about 6 inches away from the tree, the base of the tree, stuff like that. Like I don't know, like just kind of saying. And I also noticed, I think I apologize quite a bit, because I know that there's so much work going into each draft, and every ask that I'm adding or any detail that I'm adding impacts their time. It goes back to the time. And so I'm just like, I make sure that they can tell that I'm so grateful and I love that their work, and that's coming from a genuine and authentic place, because it's easy to love their work and it's so beautiful. And then I say like, these are some tweaks that I would make. Here are hard like non-negotiables, like these need to change, and here it would be nice to have. and anything that like wasn't completely inaccurate, like I just left alone. You just kind of have to choose, I guess, your battles. Like you could just be that person and be like really granular and like it's never perfect, but that just doesn't help anyone. Nothing gets solved, nothing gets published in the end. I just chose things that I felt was like most important in conveying what was happening and focusing on that. Because I just didn't want to be the overbearing author. That's like so important to me. I just didn't want to be hard to work with. So I think my notes were trying to be as concise as possible considering the subject matter. So they would still be kind of long, but like I think in hindsight they could have been so much longer. So yeah.
And so it sounds like these are art notes like after the fact, right? Like after you've seen some spreads and been going through. So initially, did you have any art notes, or was it just because it feels like the text could kind of speak for itself? So like I'm just thinking about myself, like if I were writing a nonfiction like that, I don't know how much I would have needed to add, especially because it is sort of an informational text as opposed to, you know, like a story text. So it doesn't really matter like, you know, what the people are doing or like what the tree is like, right? So I guess I'm curious about like whether or not you felt the need to add any like initially to like send them in the right direction, or if the text was sufficient.
There was quite a few illustrator notes in the manuscript itself when it was first sent, because I was you know, I think it was helpful for them to see like a framing kind of. But they're more like suggestions anyway. And then when they gave me the art. So to answer your question, I didn't really send art notes first. I just had illustrator notes where it's just like, it would be nice, like this would be cool, like if you could see it the way that I'm seeing it, you know. But I really trust artists and their craft, and that they can see things better than we who are not artists can. And so you know, again, suggestions. And so when they sent me the first drafts and stuff, like that's when I would go. But it really helps that they were gardeners, because they asked me questions too. They were just like, the one that stands out is the one that I had brought up earlier as an example, which is like, how far away should we put the compost? And I just thought that was so thoughtful of them to even consider. I could just tell just from that question and me not prompting them about it, that they were being very considerate and careful about how they're presenting the information, which, you know.
I wouldn't even know to ask that question. That really speaks to what a great marriage of interest and experience the partnership is. I have to observe, having also been a technical writer in the past, this notion of like how you must have gotten these Word documents back and clicked on track changes and gone in and just left a whole bunch of comments, which was 100% the 10 years of my experience as a technical writer. Most of what I did is commenting things up. But more seriously, it is interesting to think about the nonfiction authors that we talk to, which there have been a lot, who are in essence journalists who find something that is really interesting to them, and they explore, do some more research. There are certain people that we've talked to who thrive on that research, and that's part of their writing process. This is obviously something that you've internalized as part of yourself. You had resources that you'd use through your certification, but this is who you are. Your second hat in the assembly of this book was as scientific consultant, in essence. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm interested in that from the perspective of, you know, how you see your career, because like you've already said, you don't see yourself as a nonfiction author going forward. You've written a lot of fiction. Do you enjoy the nonfictional aspect of the assembly of this book? Was it special because it's Compost and something that's close to your heart? Do you see yourself in exploring this sort of thing again?
Yes to all three.
That was a lot. That was a lot of questions.
I definitely want to explore this further. I mean, I did have 2 other manuscripts, hopefully in the pipeline, that are in the same vein. I'm really hoping that I have a different story that comes out before if those ever come out, simply because I don't want to be pigeonholed as an author who writes Compost. Not that that is bad, you know, like that's not a bad thing.
Very specific. Yeah.
This is your market. This is the only thing you can write.
Write us another dirt book, Dirt Girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I like, and there's some authors who, you know, this is their thing, this is their niche, and that's cool. But I never saw myself as that kind of author. I definitely want to be an author that has that shows chops in many different areas. Certainly, I'm hoping that like I'll have some kind of middle grade novel out. That would be amazing. A fiction one, I should say, specifically. And that one...
Not a middle grade about compost.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, you could expand.
Right. Each chapter is a different decomposer. Oh, my God.
Oh, boy. If anyone could write that, I have faith that you could. So.
Sure. But... yeah, I mean, I have so many interests, and there's certainly like stories that I feel like should be written more. Or I wish that I would have been able to read as a kid. Like, I'm really thinking about 6-year-old me, because she was probably the most creative that I've ever will be. And I try to speak to her and like what she was missing on her childhood. And so one of the things that I want to write is like a book on Filipino mythology. I just would love that so much, and I didn't have that growing up, and I still have trouble finding that written for an audience that isn't like in college on like a research grade dense level. And it would just be so amazing, because there's so many fantastic stories that just haven't been told or I haven't seen, and so that would be amazing. But again, like, it would just be so cool if like I had something about compost and then something about mythology, and it's just like so different, you know?
Totally.
Have you and Dan talked about that sort of thing before? The mythology?
He pushes me. He knew about the like how I have chickens, and he asked me like, why haven't you written a chicken book yet? Similar to you both. Why haven't you written a book about birds? Because like clearly I care about it. And I'm like, it's getting there. I'm sorry.
Right.
And he definitely like kind of pings me a little bit. I'm a beekeeper also, so it's just like, why don't you write a thing about pollination?
Where's your bee book?
Yeah, why don't you do a bee book? But there's so many great books about pollinators and bees already. So I kind of think about that, not to say that the market is flooded, because I don't entirely believe that that's true for any particular subject. There's a way to write something new everywhere, or refreshed in some kind of fashion anywhere. But I just think about what's most important and what I feel like needs to be told now, today. Like, there's again, a lot of books about birds, a lot of books about bees, but not a lot of books about Filipino mythology, which I think little kids that look like me would like to read, and even little kids who don't look like me would be really interested to see anyway. So, because it's
totally
fantastic. Yeah.
And I have this is a selfishly personal question, but my husband is Filipino, and he grew up in the Philippines until he was like 8, and then came to the States.
Yeah, Brenna's question is, can you please write that book for my husband?
Well, and also, I'm just interested. Were you born in the Philippines, or were you born in California? Or I know you're in Hawaii now, so I'm just curious.
I'm gonna throw y'all for a loop. I was born in Germany.
What the what? That is a loop. Wait. Do you have is one or both of your parents in the military?
Yeah, there you go.
There it is.
My father was in the army, so I was born in Germany. Spent my first 8 years, my first 8 formative years there, which I think is so fortunate, because I probably wouldn't love nature as much as I do if I wasn't constantly surrounded by it being in Germany. Yeah.
That's so interesting. My husband is also from a military family. So his mom was Filipino, and his stepdad was in the military. He was stationed there. He met his mom, came over to the States. So anyways, that's how I figured.
Cousins,
that was my guess.
Probably.
Yeah, probably. You probably know each other. Right? That makes sense. No, I just, like I said, selfishly interested because there's some similarities. I mean, that's amazing. I agree with you. There are no books out there about any sort of Filipino myths or characters, or that's very cool.
I mean, there are, but just not that I've seen anyway. I should probably like really I haven't, but like at like a child level. Yeah.
And I wonder from the perspective of marketability and how you think about this, or you have a question about this. When you run into, whether this is something, personal and cultural for you in the form of Filipino mythology, or, something that's just academically has not been covered that much in picture books. If you think about saleability, do you write it if there isn't anything else like it? Will publishers take a chance on something that hasn't been written before? And I guess you don't know until you write it.
Yeah, I guess that's a thing too. I can't speak to how everyone else writes, but for me, I just write to the little kid what she wanted to read. Like, I just write to that person, because in the same way where, there's market trends, like I can't follow that trend and then suddenly the trend changes, and then what do I do with this manuscript, because it's not cared for anymore. Like, I just have to keep trusting that, what I'm writing for, that I'm not the only one who wants to read it, and like hopefully people see that it's as important as I see that it's as I see the story needs to be like shared. And I think the nice thing about writing in that way instead of following market trends is that at the end of the day, if the market changes, I still have this book that I've always wanted to write and always wanted to read as a kid. I still have it for me. And so like that's, what's that worth? So
yeah. It's an interesting question too, because as you were asking it, Josh, I was thinking like, well, that's what everyone says they want, right? Like something new that they haven't seen before. But it's interesting because, sometimes it might be too new or too out there or too unique, and they're like, well, there's no market for this. And you're like, okay, but, like where's the line? And then like you're saying, like it always comes back to, you have to write what you want to write. Yeah. Otherwise, like the story's not going to be good. Like nobody's going to care because you don't care. The connection isn't there. So like, you have to just forget about trends and like what might be saleable and write what you're going to write and hope that it resonates on the other end. But
yeah, and I think the thing about things being new really is that there's not really anything brand new. Like everything's kind of connected to a different story in some way or other. So speaking on Filipino mythology, there's things that feel like, oh, I haven't heard that before. But if you like, trace back enough, like there's influences from, like Asia, definitely like mainland Asia coming in through the Philippines because of the trades, or just like there's stories that also follow those trade lines. And so there's familiarity in some kind of way, and it's a refreshing kind of thing. So there's a short story that I had written for adults. The audience for adults is very gory, and it's about a Filipino vampire called the Manananggal. I don't know if you folks have ever heard of that, Manananggal. Really cool, really cool vampire. It's basically a Filipino vampire who splits itself in half, and the only way to kill it is to put salt on the bottom half so that it can't refuse together by like midnight. See, or it has to be salt on it, and then the sun hits it, and then it will die because it can't refuse. But
there's your middle grade,
right? It's So like that's like an idea. It's just like, oh, that's so new, but in the end of the day, it's still a vampire. It's still preying on
right.
Who, but like,
still come to Twilight.
And right. Well, and I mean, Filipino culture obviously knows about that vampire, right? Yeah. I mean, like if you trace back far enough, like I'm sure there's cultural ties there that they're like, oh yeah, like I know who that is, right? So
yeah. Or what that is. So it's just, and there's so many superstitions too, and like it's just so interesting why
Filipinos are so superstitious.
They are so superstitious.
Which you can say because you're married to one, of course.
Right, and he also says, he's like, no, really, he's like, we're so superstitious, like anyways, that's a thing. So
if but back to the question too, if it's too new and people don't want it now, try again a couple years, Totally.
Like, the market will turn over.
Someone will say yes eventually. You just have to trust in the work. Like, again, I can't be the only one who thinks this is interesting.
Totally, right?
Hooked me on the Filipino vampire.
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, right?
There's another little I'm going to just say another little story too. This I found through my cousins because there's just different variations of a story too. There's a monster, I guess we can call it a monster, called a tikbalang, which is basically this human body with a face like a horse who's very mischievous and purposely tries to get people lost in the woods. And the only way, like, you'll be traveling in circles, basically. And the only way to get out of, like, being lost is by taking your shirt off, turning it inside out, and putting it on, because you look different. So it's confused, like, oh, this is a new person, and, like, you can get out of the lost cycle. But it's, like, stuff that's, like, so ridiculous and silly, and, like, who thought about this? And it's just, like, it's interesting. It's so different and weird.
So cool.
Yeah.
It is cool. That's a great, it's so, like, kid-friendly, too. Like, okay, like, I have to look different, so I'll just, like, switch my shirt, and, like, that's the way out.
Yeah.
Also, quick sub-question. So, to what end does he want these people lost in the woods? Like, is he somehow, like, what is he gaining from this?
That's the thing. They're just, like, they're not human. And that's another thing that's, like, really cool, too. Filipino mythology has humans, like, within this world that we're very much, like, peons. We're, like, very much lower. There's, like, we're in a beast's world. Like, they're not living in our world. We're living in theirs. And so they're not even there to, like, really hurt us or kill us. It's just amusing. So just be lost until forever. I don't care. Like, I have no intention to kill you. Like, just be lost. And, like, we can't pretend to know what their motivations are. Sometimes, like, there's, like, a case where, like, you know, I heard of a story where a guy like peed on a, like, little anthill mound. So and that little anthill mound turned out to be a little dwarf's home, and so he cursed the guy so that he was never hungry, like, so he never had an appetite, so he didn't eat, and so he starved to death. Like, I heard of these, like, you know, and it's, like, wild, and these, like, short snippet stories, and I can imagine elaborating each of these and putting it to some kind of middle grade. I just feel like there's so much potential.
Like, that short,
listen to the last
like
15 minutes of this episode,
right?
Yeah.
Or, like, a short story, like, this could even be, like, a call for an anthology or something, like, or like a middle grade, like, short stories for you of, like, Filipino myths. Those are fascinating.
Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, keep us posted. I would like to read those.
For sure. I'm glad you find them as interesting as I do, because some of them are, like, anecdotal, like I hear from, like, friends or cousins, and some of them are, like, definitely, like, research, like I never heard of them before until I read them in a college paper. And it's just, like, really cool how deep the rabbit hole goes, and even how different they vary from regions. It's not just, like, all Filipinos believe in this. Like, there's, like, pantheons, like, for the Tagalogs, or pantheons for, like, the Ilocos, and it's just, that's the part that's, like, slowing me down too, is because, like, how can I take these stories and present them in a respective way that, like, there's people out there who still believe in these gods or goddesses, and, like, would it be fictional to them? Like, is that respectful? So it's just, like, this thing where it's just, like one of my favorite goddesses is this goddess named Mabuyan. And I'm sorry, like, I know that we might be running on time, but
no, that's fine.
This is all going to be very pertinent when you sell your mythology book. We're going to revisit
thank you.
that.
Right? Totally.
But this goddess named Mabuyan, and she's I believe, Bogobo goddess, and she is a goddess of the underworld. It looks super cool, by the way. Highly recommend you Google and type down Mebuyan. And she basically, for unborn children who maybe die at childbirth or prior to that, she takes them into the underworld and raises them in the underworld, so they still, like, they grow up in the underworld and then pass them on. And, like, I think that's so beautiful. Like, you don't hear about that, but it tells you about what's so important to, like, you know, the Filipino people, like, ancient Filipino peoples. Like, if they lose a child in childbirth, like, it needs to have a life afterward. Like, it doesn't just disappear. Just, there's more that happens.
I feel like
it's so beautiful.
I feel like now that's a book that I feel like would resonate with so many people, and is such an important, like, just a new way to think about it. Like, we have talked, you know, several times about books on the podcast, about, you know, rainbow babies or you know, miscarriages, and how hard that is on everyone, you know, the extended family, the mom, the you know, siblings that might have the kid come in, you know, whatever that is. I feel like that's such an important book and like an important take on, you know, what is sort of going on in society now too, because there is a lot around, you know, reproductive health, and it's getting, you know, some people just have a really hard time conceiving, and then they do, and they can't, you know, have the child to term. This is taken sort of a dark turn, but I mean it to be like, you know, this is like I feel like that could give people a lot of hope, or like not relief, but like, you know, a sort of calm, like, okay, like maybe this is a thing, like maybe, you know, that's what happened, and it's, you know, gives them some kind of like solace.
And that's goes right down to it, like this goddess, like there's people who might still believe her, and if I wrote her into the story, because she's my favorite one, if I wrote her into the story, like would that be considered disrespectful? And I don't exactly have connections to the Bobobo people, so like it's just kind of like all because I don't, or if they're like a smaller, like I don't even know if tribe is the right word, but if they're smaller like people amount, is it still like okay to write about simply because of that? Like, and so sometimes I just have to like opt out, and then there's like the entire like conversation about like who am I to be the one who even writes about it, because I'm Filipino American, I'm not from like the Philippines, so it's just like there's a lot of like things where I'm like, I'm gonna write it, but you know.
I get that. It's too bad too, because I feel like sharing that particular story would like really help a lot of people, you know, but you're right, like you never know like what line am I crossing, or is this okay, because it's not technically mine.
Just a quick suggestion. Please do go and Google Mabuyan. I did it while we were talking, and there are some incredible depictions and illustrations out there.
They're so great.
I'm curious. Maybe there's nothing to this. Maybe there is. I'm curious to the extent that you are multilingual.
Is that the question? Sorry, I started talking.
Yeah, that was a question.
So I go through the thing that a lot of, I guess, children of diaspora or children from immigrant parents go through, which is receptive bilingualism, which is in the intent of integrating the child in the American society, or any society other than the one that the parents came from. They only spoke English, or mostly English, in the household, to like, okay, now you're good. Mine was really interesting. So I grew up speaking Ilocano, and only spoke that for the first, like, I would say 6 years of my life. And then they put me into kindergarten. I got into ESL because I couldn't speak English, and then forgot, kind of, which is really, it's like not really forgetting completely, but like being able to understand a language fluently, but not being able to speak it fluently back. And that's the receptive bilingualism that happens. It's like a really interesting phenomenon that happens to children of these two worlds, kind of thing. That is to say that, like, if I sat and thought long enough, like, I would be able to, like, put a question together. But, like, for example, at home, like, my parents would speak to me in fluent Ilocano, and I would just speak back in English. And, so I would say, I guess if you're looking at a scale, I would consider myself, like, a B2 for Latin language scale for Ilocano. So, like, conversational to a point, but I'm not gonna be writing really in Ilocano. Like, I want to. I would definitely love to write like a PB that is in English first and then Ilocano in the back, or some kind of cool variants of. I've seen Hawaiian language picture books like that, and I think they're really cool. And so to answer your question, yes, no. I just go on a tangent.
No, this is it's salient to ask, one, because I'm forever curious about languages and how that's raised in the cultural connections therewith, but the degree to which that gives you a cultural connection or direct connection back to, not your home culture, since you consider yourself Filipino American, but the culture of your heritage. Right, like the authenticity with which you feel that connection.
Right. And that's really interesting too, because I have, cousins that come directly from like the Philippines, and have never tapped into any sort of mythology or the culture in that kind of way, because the Philippines was colonized for over 300 years. So a lot of that culture is already gone in some capacity. Like, they just don't know because it's not, like, where would they learn it from? Everyone who understood it or passed it down, what's not passed down is gone forever. And, like, those gaps are, like, how do you fill those in? It's just, you
write books on Filipino mythology.
Yeah, that's what you do.
Right.
Dan can make sales in the Philippines.
I feel like Dan has a bit of a bias too, because his husband is also Filipino, so there's that.
Right.
All right, make it happen.
Yeah.
Totally, all these connections. Yeah. Well, go ahead.
We've gone quite far from Compost.
Yeah, we did. I just realized. Is that what we're here for?
Yeah, right. No, it's been awesome. Like, I appreciate you sharing, like, so much of your process and your ideas with us. Like, it's been really cool to talk with you. And I'm just acknowledging that we are over the hour. So I'm just wrapping us up to say, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks for listening this week.
Find all of our episodes and other associated links and information at linktree.com/verseshow.
Or reach out to us on Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next verse.
Bye.